Díomhghuine Ushla, is Misha, Moira, Shanachie, Corky. Hello, everybody. It's Maria Gillen, the Cork-based storyteller, and it's wonderful to be here. We had some technical issues. We had some fights with the fairies before we came on tonight, but it's great now to be on the World Storytelling Cafe. Tell me, tell me where you're dialing in from. Where are you dialing in from? And you can put it in the chat. We're dying to know where you're coming in from tonight as we tell stories on the World Storytelling Cafe in cyberspace. And let me see the storytellers and the countries that are represented here tonight. I'm just going to have a look at my little screen. We have Norman Perrin, all the way from Toronto, red and white, the same color as Cork. We have Babada C, Babada, Babada, Babada. Babada is from the USA, but when he's in Africa, everybody thinks that that is where he's from because he dresses in the wonderful clothes of an African man. We have Mike Wood, who set everything up technically. So, Mike, the 15 minutes, I'm going to take them at the end, just to let you know. We have Rona, Simon, and Irene all in the one room, all dialing in from the UK. We have Donald Nelson. He is my Celtic cousin, and he's been tipped off that he might give us a little story today, but I'll see. I'll see if I let him in or not. He has to be good, and he has to speak to me Oscuega. And then we have Shane Ames. Shane is one of my story brothers from the peer group Mad for Road. Isn't that an excellent name? I tell you now, it suits us down to the ground. And very shortly, we'll all be meeting in Kilkenny, the Mad for Road crew. And we came together as a collective in Marrakesh that first time after the Lurgy. So we were all looking at one another on these little screens, and nobody knew if people actually had arms and legs. And when we saw one another walking down the streets of Marrakesh, our brains exploded. So that's some news from the Story Road. And I just want to give a huge shout out, a big hella to the Iron Mind crew. Who are these people, I hear you ask? They are 17 crazy Irishmen who are running a marathon in the Sahara Desert. You know, only crazy people and Irish and English people go out in the midday sun in the Sahara Desert. So as they're running along the Sahara, we give a big shout out to them all, and especially to my own cousin, Alan Carney, who lives in Melbourne, but he's a Cork man through and through. So now, because we've talked about the desert, I suppose I better tell you a story about the sea so that we don't get parched. I told this story on Storytellers of Ireland's platform for World Storytelling Day. And Baden the Liar said I had some cheek calling him Baden the Liar after hearing this story. So I'll tell it to you. It's a 3,000-year-old story from the annals of Irish stories, and you can tell me if you believe it or not at the end. Did you ever meet a daydreamer? Did you though? Or are you a daydreamer yourself? Do you sometimes fall inside your eyes? Do you sometimes forget that you're actually in a place supposed to be telling stories or doing a maths class or doing the accounts? Well, if you're one of those people, and I think I'm one of those people, well, if you're one of those people, this is a story just for you. Over 3,000 years ago, Ireland was a completely different place. We were a rainforest. There was many trees everywhere you looked, and the trees were so tall and so ancient that they became the masts in many ships. And those are other stories that I'll tell you another day. But in this time, the roots of the trees were so luscious and so big that you'd be hard pressed to run the length of Ireland like our boys are running in the Saharan marathon this week, because the roots would trip you up. So they became really good at silently hanging onto a branch and pulling themselves out and being a taisha and ghosting it around the trees. Yeah, in fact, it was one of the rules of the Fianna that you had to be able to drop from a tree completely silently and not wake up any of your enemies. But long before the Fianna came into being, Ireland was Ulscoil na Dia. It was the University of the Gods. Oh, I'd like anybody know to say that I'm wrong on that one, because it's the absolute truth. And there was one god who was going to the Ulscoile, he was going to the university, and his name was Manannán. What was his name? That's right, Manannán. And Manannán was handsome. Let me paint you a picture of him now. He was as tall as Baba C. He had beautiful black mahogany skin. That's what the books tell us. But his eyes were as blue as an Irish sky, which meant on a summer's day they looked like the Mediterranean. But when he was cross or cranky or confused, his eyes were like the Irish sky on a November day. He was always in trouble. He'd be sitting inside in the class and he'd open up the philosophy book and a look like this would come across his face. Donald Nelson has a look like that on his face right now, just like this. And when that happened, he was gone right into his head, right into the dreaming place. But he had the dreaming place of a god. So his dreams were magnificent altogether. Oh my goodness. So he was dreaming that there was a people coming to Ireland. I think they might have been the human beings. And he called these people the bag people, because they like to collect things and take things away. And they really liked to knock down the trees. Isn't that terrible? But they hadn't come to Ireland yet. He was a prophetic seer and he could see them coming. So he'd jump up in the middle of the class and he'd say, "Get back! Get back, you bagman! You are not welcome here!" And of course, when he'd jump up and say things like that, everybody in the class would start roaring laughing and he'd get a red blush across his cheek. "Oh my God, did I shout out loud again?" he'd say. And the teacher would give him a look like this. "You did." And so he was always getting into trouble. So do you know what he decided he would do? He decided that he would give up school. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine going home to your dad and telling him that you were giving up school? Because that's exactly what Manannán did. Manannán was the son of Lir, the god of all gods in the Celtic pantheon. And when he told his dad his plan, this is what his dad did. No! And it was so ferocious that it knocked all down the trees at the edge of Ireland, and they fell into the middle of Ireland, and the Atlantic Ocean was blown on top of them from the ferocity of Lir's no. And that is why we have bogs in Ireland, all because Manannán wouldn't go to school. So he decided, well, I better go back to school then. But it was still happening. So what was he to do? Well, what he decided to do was he decided to go and visit the wise man in the middle of the forest. The wise man was called Finnegas, and a lot of wise men were called Finnegas after him. So he went in and he found him, and this was Finnegas, the god of Ireland, the god of wisdom, Dia Ólish. And he said to the god of wisdom, "Can you tell me what I'm going to do?" And he told him his whole story. And Finnegas said, "Well, What's happening with you is your body is way too busy for your mind, and your mind can't rest. And therefore, you have daydreams. So you need to exhaust your body before you go into school. Isn't that a great idea? Shouldn't we all do that in fairness? I think that's advice 3,000 years later that we could still be taking. So he thought about it. And the first thought that came into his head was, Imania! Hurling? Of course it was. But then Finnegas looked at him and he said, would 500 people per side get up with you to play a game every morning? And he looked at him and he said, of course not. Because when the gods played hurling, it was 500 a side. And that's where thunder and lightning comes from. Okay, so he said, if I can't play the Amani, I'll have to think of something I can do on my own. And he thought about it. And he thought about the salmon and how the salmon became a silver streak in the loch foyle every morning and how beautiful it was. And he thought, I'll take up swimming. And he mentioned it kind of half under his breath. And Finnegas said, can you swim? He said, no, I can't, but I'm a god. I'm sure I'll learn. So he went to the edge of Loch Foyle and he locked down his hands and he jumped into the water. And on his very first try, he was able to make it 5 times around the circumference of Loch Foyle. But by Friday, sure, when Friday came, he was able to make it 150 times around the loch. So he was he was dizzy and he was like, this is not going to work. So he said, I need to take myself off to the Atlantic Ocean. Where did he need to take himself off to?
The Atlantic Ocean.
The Atlantic Ocean. Thank you, Baba C and Shane Ibbs and all the others who shouted out the answer. Exactly. So off he went to the Atlantic Ocean. And all of the children of the gods of Ireland, they stood on the cliff and they watched him like a streak of silver salmon go through the grey waters of the Atlantic Ocean. But you know what our weather is like. Our weather is very unpredictable indeed. The sky started to darken and go black, and the water started to get colder, and the children of the gods of Ireland began to shout, but he couldn't hear them, for he'd fallen into a deep and beautiful daydream. But the sea decided she'd take a hand in it, so she began to freeze him, and the cold got into his bones, and he went, and then he stuck his head up out of the water, and he saw waves as big as mountains, and troughs as deep as the deepest valleys, and he began to get afraid. And as he went down under the water for the first time, glug, 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 he shouted, help me! And a thought came into his head. And he thought to himself, I've never heard that voice in my head before. It's not the voice of my father or my mother or any of my friends. It's not my own voice. And the voice said, hey, dreamer, what can you see? And as he came up the first time, he could see the waves as high as mountains and the troughs as deep as valleys and the white foam atop the waves. So as he was going down for the second time, he said, oh, I see the grey sky, I see the grey water, I see the white foam. Glug, 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 glug. And he was pulled under for the second time. And as he was coming up for the third time, he heard that strange voice in his head one more time. And the voice said, anyone can see that, dreamer. Anyone can see that. But what can you see? What can you really see? And he began to look at the water. and he began to narrow his focus until he was looking at just one drop of water. And in that drop of water, he saw the whole universe. And as he came up for the third time, he said, one drop of water contains the whole universe. And the water began to warm up, and the sky began to clear. And Manannán fancied that the sea was smiling at him. And then in his head, he heard the voice say, dive deeper, dreamer. So he jumped up into the air like a free salmon, and he dove down deep, deep into the water. And as he looked around, the things he saw were only amazing. He saw teeny tiny fish, so tiny you could see through them. He saw fish so big that you could build a city on their back. He saw a forest of coral in so many different colours that I couldn't even describe them to you. And he saw an iridescent wall, a cliff of iridescence. Have you ever seen a bubble and you know it's invisible, but across the skin of the bubble comes every colour you've ever thought of in your whole life, and some colours that cannot be described? This is what the wall of iridescence looked like. And he swam straight up to it, and then he popped straight through. In this place under the sea, there was another world with air in it, and he was using his feet now, running and running with joy through this new place. And the things he saw mountains made of cheese. He saw lakes made of milk. He saw rivers made of Ishkabaha. What is Ishkabaha? Go on, Donald, tell them all. It's whiskey. That's right,
Well,
Donald.
that will be the water of life.
The water of life, the whiskey. And he drank from that, and he drank from the lakes of milk, and he ate from the mountains of cheese, and every single one of them was top quality. Then at the edge of the river, he saw a white horse with shaggy eyebrows, and some might say it had seen better days. To you or to me, we might say you couldn't get up on the back of that horse. It would be cruel. But he had the eyes of a dreamer now. So he went and he took the reins of the horse and he pulled it close and he looked deep into its soul, Finoga on him, into the windows to the soul, into the eyes. And do you know what he saw there? That's right. He saw lots and lots and lots of adventures still to come. So he jumped up on the little silver carriage behind. It was so beautiful. Into it was carved the triskells and the spirals and the Ogham language, the oldest language to be written, the Irish language. And he put out his left hand, your heart hand. The reason it's a heart hand is because your heart travelled up this hand and into its place before you were born. It is the hand of emotional intelligence. He clicked at the horse and they took off at speed, and two rainbows of colours opened up on either side of him because he was going so fast. Finally, they came back to the wall of iridescence, and whoosh, right through it they went. He came up through the turbulent sea of the Atlantic Ocean, and when he reached the top of the choppy waves, the children of the gods of Ireland were a queena. They were keening, they were crying, they were grieving because they had thought that they lost their great friend. but they turned to cheering when they saw Manannán. And with his left hand holding onto the rein and his right hand up in the air, he shouted across the Atlantic Ocean, "My name is Manannán Mac Lir, and I am God of the sea." And that's only the first of his stories. Can you imagine the stories to
Oh no, there she was gone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're having some technical difficulties. Please do not touch your knobs or change the channel.
Oh, Ginny.
Is it time for Donald to tell his story while we're waiting? What do you think, Donald?
A short one, because she'll be back in a moment.
Are we still live? Are we?
Yeah, we're live, Donald. Well, I'm
Yep.
alive.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, not quite so much a story, but a poem I wrote a long time ago. And quite recently, I think in the past week, in Loch Ness, there were some people like sort of just doing a survey, and they found this camera, which was 180 meters under the water, trying to spot the Loch Ness monster, Nessie. And it reminded me of a good few years ago. I was up at Loch Ness, and I was in the Drumna Rocket Hotel quite late in the evening. And after a few drams of Glenmorangie, I'm quite sure when I came out, I saw the Loch Ness monster. But then again, in Glasgow, when I came out, I've seen pink elephants and camels with 3 heads, and so. But anyway, I was up in Drumna Rocket, and they were telling me in the hotel, they were telling me all these people who had come looking for the Loch Ness monster. She's very, very shy, so they couldn't find her. But what they don't do is take all the gear that they've taken up with them away with them. So I wrote this poem, and it's actually it's in an anthology by the Scottish Poetry Library, but this is my poem about Loch Ness. It's called Too Messy for Nessie, and I wrote it so long ago I have to read it off my phone. Oh, there's a terrible mess in the shores of Loch Ness, where the monster's been chucking her bones. There's bonnets and sporrans all tattered and torn, and a pile of chewed up mobile phones. There's socks and there's shoes and bits of canoes, and they've all turned a bit slimy and green. There's flippers and goggles and Venture Scouts woggles, and the fins from a small submarine. There's camera gear piled up over the years, rusting away in the shores. And there once was a man who lived in the shores in a van. Now all that are left are the doors. Now you might think Nessie is terribly messy, with her rubbish and piles of old bones. So stop trying to watch her and stop trying to catch her. It's her place. Just leave her alone. Thank you.
Okay, Maria will be joining us any moment now. I just readmitted her. There you are.
I don't know what happened.
We don't need, but you know what? It happens to me sometimes. And it happened to me in the middle of the story.
And yes, did I get to the end of the story?
You had just said, imagine what adventures are to come, or something worse to that effect.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And told us a lovely a poem about Nessie. I like her chocolate, Nessie Quick. That's a bad pun. Oh, you got it. All right.
Oh my goodness, so sad about that.
It's
Okay,
not
so
I
anyway,
have to ask you a question. When you blinked out, did you come back on automatically or did you have to re-sign in?
I had to re-sign in.
Well, duh, I'm asking you
We
that.
will
And I'm
talk about the tech afterwards, but right now there's children waiting for stories.
yes,
I
yes.
can't see our lovely Louis, but I'm going
No,
to give him a big kiss because I think with all of the technical issues, he might have faded out on us, but he will see this when he plays it back.
Yeah, well, go, Louis.
Exactly. So now that we're here, kind of, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a mourning story from the mammies of Ireland, because they used to say that sometimes it felt like they were rearing their children for the boats. They'd have
Maria, excuse me a wee minute. Going to
Yeah.
just finish the end of that last story.
Oh, did you not hear the end of the last
Oh, you-
story,
you just
Michael?
disappeared.
Where did I disappear? Because
Like
I
this, like
just
me
checked with
hanging on the
Baba
very
C.
edge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Baba C said that, can you imagine his other adventures, which is the end of the story? Did you hear that bit, Michael?
I did hear that, but I didn't realize that was the end. Pardon
That
me.
was the end of that story. And then there's
Sorry.
loads more to come. But I'll tell you those stories another day. But thank you for checking in. So now let me see. So I'm going to tell you this story. And it was whenever any of us are going away, they always say, Tararash. Arish go era, Tararash, Arish go era. And it's like a little blessing which says, please come back at some stage. And I remember my mom saying that to me myself when I was leaving Ireland, and then when I left Cork and was in Dublin, I was getting the same message. So this is a story to all of those that are out there thinking, should I go home? Once upon a time, there was a little woman. She was a small, happy, apple-cheeked little woman. She had twinkly eyes that would draw you in. She was just a very happy, lovely little woman. And she had 9 children. 9! But that wasn't unusual in the time that this story was set. And then one by one, her children came to see her and they said, Mom, put the blessing on my head. I'm leaving this place. And she'd put the blessing on their head and she'd say, oh, tá súlagam, go that you, I have a real hope. Tararasha rishka era. Tararasha rishka era. Come back again to Ireland. Come back again. That's all I ask. And they'd look at her sadly, because in those days, when you took the boat away from the island countries, and a lot of our small little island countries know this, when you took the boat away, chances were you'd never see them again, because they had no telephones, they had no television, and even the post was spotty. So one by one, each of her children came and they said goodbye to their mom, and she wished them well, and she'd light the candle and she'd put it on the windowsill and she'd say the prayers to keep them safe. That was the most important thing. If they were safe and far away, it was better than traveling back and being taken by the sea. So she'd let her hopes be known, but she'd say instead that they should go with the will of the higher power. And the years passed, and the letters came but infrequently, and still she could see the faces of each of her children. And then something happened. One by one, they started to come and visit their mother. First, there was a knock on the door, and it was her eldest son. I'm home from New York, ma'am. Oh, the things that I've seen there. They have moving pictures, ma'am. And my work, when I have to climb out on these girders that are so high up in the air that it's like being on the top of the cliffs of Moher. She laughed out loud at that. Thank God I wasn't there to see it, she said. But when I see it in my imagination, it's something else. And he smiled and he said, have you the kettle on, ma'am? because we're all addicted to our Barry's tea in this country. I have, she said, and she'd make it fine and strong that you could trot a mouse across the top of it. And then she'd make him the rashers and the sausages, and she'd say, go on, tell me some more of your adventures. And he would, happily. And then he said, Mum, I have to go back now. And he was gone, and she was lonesome, but not for long, because there was a knock on the door, and it was her daughter, all the way from Canada. Hi, Mom. How are you? I'm great, she said. And how are you getting on? Mom, I'm nursing out there in Canada, and it's amazing there. The people are incredible, and they have stories just like our own. There is the Gananoque people. Oh, Mom, they're so welcoming. They'd be as welcoming now as you be yourself. Have you the tea on, Ma'am? I have, she said. Of course, the kettle is always singing here. But she was delighted to be asked, because she knew that that meant her daughter would be staying a while. And she did stay a while. And they shared lovely stories and recipes and happy times. And then she said, Mom, I have to go back. And when she was gone about 2 or 3 days, there was a knock from her son in England. She always worried about him because he was kind of shy. How are you getting on there in London? She said. Oh, Ma'am, there's so many Irish people there. I'm telling you now, the dances are full of them. Sure, half them still speak Suchong and Driachta in the magical language. That's brilliant, she said. And Ma'am, they've very similar food to ourselves. They have lovely tea. They call it Yorkshire tea. It's not as good as Barry's tea, but almost as good. And Ma'am, they have handsome rashers and sausages. Do they? She said, delighted that he was eating properly. Mothers are always worried whether their children are eating properly. But he was, and he had the tight belt around his stomach to prove it. And so they kept coming, always with a day or two in between. And she took to writing down their stories in a big red book. And when she was lonesome, she'd take out the book and she'd remember. And she'd say, that's right, they have movies in New York. And they have those amazing people in Canada. And they have fine tea, Yorkshire tea in London. Oh, yeah, they're all fine. They're all hale. They're all hearty. And the years passed. And when she had lived a fine, long, happy life, she passed away and went to meet her Maker. All her children came home then to see that the rituals were looked after. They had to travel for a long time. There was no planes back then, just boats and trains and Shanks mare, which means your own legs. And so they all arrived to their mother's little house. And the girl said, oh my God, did we all grow up here? 9 of us. Where did we fit? And all the boys said, oh, 'twas ship shape when we were here. Oh, there's a hole up there in the wall. We'll fix it, for she wouldn't have liked that. And they made sure her garden was pretty and cut back so that the neighbours could come in and say their final goodbye. And when they had the light lit next to her body, they saw something. They saw something near the table. What was that? They found her red little book. They opened it up and they read the story about their brother in New York. And he smiled and he said, she got me exactly. She got me exactly. And then they moved on to the story about the sister in Canada. She said, completely touched by what her mother said, their hearts aching for the distance that would temporarily be between them. And then her son from England, sure, he was delighted with her comments about the Yorkshire tea. If you were from Ireland, you would know what that meant. And then they looked at one another When did you come home to visit Mum and you didn't tell us? When did you come home? When did you come home? It was then they realised they had never come home. But because of the blessings that she put on the heads of her children as they left, something in heaven gave her the gift of their stories. Somehow their stories made their way into her heart. And they supped on their tea, and no more words were spoken as they thought of a mother's blessing. So Shine Mushkale, that is my story. I see now that we have 20 minutes left, and I'm just checking by a thumbs up. Donald, did you get in to tell a tale?
Yeah, he
Yes,
He
I
did.
did.
Very good.
I
Yeah,
told
the
a story in a poem about the Loch Ness Monster.
Oh, I'd have to watch it back, and I look forward to it. So I'm the kind of storyteller that comes from the session tradition. And in the session tradition, there is always a bouquet of accents. And I love that. I love when you hear not just one voice, but lots of voices. And it's one of the things that is said about the Mad for Roads, that wherever we gather, there's a beautiful bouquet of accents. So it's very strange for me to be telling like this with so many master storytellers on my screen. I just love them all. I love you all, you know. And maybe down the road, we'll have a session, Erlina. We'll have a session online where we'll tell all the stories to one another. But I'm trying to keep the rules tonight. I'm trying hard, Baba C. So I might tell you another little story. Now, let me see. My cousin, Alan Carney, who's running the 250, he's running, jogging and walking because the conditions are horrendous in the Sahara. And I don't know how they're going to cope during the day. And then they all sleep in one tent with a low roof by nighttime. And they carry all their food and all of their clothes and all of their bandages and whatever they might need on their back. Now, a man who knows something about this is Shane Ibbs, because Shane Ibbs sometimes lives in the middle of the forest with no roof except what he can whittle out of wood. And I'm still fascinated at the spoons he makes. So I'm looking forward to your story share soon, Shane, where you'll tell us about them spoons. So again, a great shout out to the crazy but wonderful 17 strong Irish team called Iron Mind, who are making their way across the Sahara Desert. And Alan told me an incredible story about his grandfather, my uncle Eamon. And I won't tell you his story because it's his story, but I'll tell you this story about a grandfather and how important they are to the young men in their lives. Once upon a time, there was a young boy who lived in a town outside Cork called Fermoy. He had a kind of an ideal existence. He hadn't known his father because his father had left before he was born, but his mom and himself lived with her mom and her dad, his granny and his granddad. And his granddad and him, they were like this. I don't know which was which, but they were like this. You never saw one without the other. The grandfather would say, at 6 o'clock in the morning, he'd say, "Are you getting up out of the bed there, Shawnee?" And Shawnee would say, "I am, Grandad." And the two women would go, "Oh," not wanting to be woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So they'd sneak out of the house and then they'd run down the garden and they'd take the little boat and they'd go out into the Ceodriachta on the Blackwater River. The Ceodriachta is the magical mist that rises off of the water. And inside in that boat, he'd tell him all the great stories like Manannán Mac Lir that you heard earlier this evening. Stories with wisdom in them, like to think before you act, stories of that ilk. And so the time would pass really quickly, and they'd catch a few trout, they'd pick mushrooms on the way back, and the breakfast that the four of them would have. And his cheeks would be red and rosy from being outdoors with his grandfather, and his heart being full from the stories that his grandfather told him. When he was coming to about 6th class, when he was leaving primary school, an awful thing happened. His grandfather passed away, and he was cree-brishta. He was heartbroken, but he knew he had to be strong for the women, for that is what his grandfather always told him. And he looked at his grandmother, and she began to fade away, as if she was becoming invisible in front of their very eyes. They had been childhood sweethearts, together and in love for 70 years. And she faded after him. And now it was just him and his mom in the house. And his mom would say, "Oh my goodness, look at the chair where your granny used to sit. Or look at that piece of wood your grandfather had not finished." And he'd look at them and he'd think to himself, "I get great comfort from that. I can see Granny there. I can see Grandad, and he's shaping the wood." But he came in one day and his mother said, "I've great news for you." "What's the news?" he said, his heart dropping into his stomach. "I sold a house," she said. "I sold a house, and we're moving out of this memory mausoleum." He was beside himself. All his beautiful golden memories, everyone he knew, would be left behind. And that's what happened. And they moved into the city, the harsh city of Cork. And when he went to school, all the young fellas, sure, they'd made friends since they were that high, and there didn't seem to be room for him. He tried talking shyly. "Hello, where's your accent from?" they'd say. "That sounds a bit countryish." And he learned to be quiet. In that first year, he grew. He grew so that instead of him being the smallest boy in the class, he was now the tallest boy. He grew so fast that there was white streaks on his back from where he had grown. And now the boys looked at him with new eyes. "I claim you, Shawnee," they'd say. "I claim you for a fight." And he dreaded it. In his own words, he had to take a beating or give a beating every day, and it just wasn't him. He cut his hair short and he got a tattoo on his neck to look hard, you understand. And for a while, that worked, but only for a while. And then they'd start claiming him again. And his legs under the table would make the table dance. You know the way young fellas are always moving their legs. And the teachers would get irritated with him. And he tried to explain it wasn't his fault, that his legs were really squashed under the desk. And one day, one of the teachers shouted at him, and it was the last straw. He jumped up and pushed the desk over, and he got the teacher up against the wall. They all listened then. Oh, they all listened then. He was in big trouble. And his mother said, "Are you doing that to upset me? And I've lost my father, and I've lost my mother, and you're doing this to upset me?" And he'd go up to his room and he'd think about things, and he'd think about the good old days when his grandfather was alive, when they'd go out on the river fishing, when there'd be trout and mushrooms for his breakfast. And it kept him going a bit. And his mother spoke to everyone she knew to get a bit of help. And the women said, "Who's his role model then? Who's his male role model?" And she said, "Sure, that was my father, and he's gone." And they said, "That's what he might need, a man in his life. Go down to the men's shed, they're lovely, Ask for Jimmy. He's just lovely and he might be able to help you. So down she went and she came as far as the gate. And Jimmy said, stay back. This is the men's shed. It's the only place we have to ourselves. I know that, she says, I'm looking for Jimmy. I'm Jimmy, he said, and she explained everything to him. Sure, send him down to me, he said. Send him down to me next Tuesday. And he took note of how much in grief the poor woman was, and he wondered how the boy was doing. She went home and she told Shawnee, and he said, are you joking me? I'm not going down there. You've made a finger point out of me. Look, she said, why don't you go down? Sure, that Jimmy is the same age as your grandfather. And that softened him a bit, but he resolved not to go. He had a terrible time in school that week. And as he walked through Cork City on the weekend, he said, I will go. I'll go and see him on Tuesday. He didn't go into school at all on Monday because he knew there was a fight waiting for him. And on Tuesday, he thought he'd go, then he thought he wouldn't go, then he thought he'd go. And the result was he was very late. And Jimmy was cleaning down his tools, getting them ready for the next day when he saw the young fella come down the road. And the young fella looked at him and he just didn't give any suss to it because of how late he was. And then eventually he went, I'm Shawnee. You are, said Jimmy, and you're late. You're Shawnee, and you're late. I'm very sorry, he said, and he couldn't believe his own ears to hear the apology come out of himself. He couldn't remember the last time he'd said sorry. I really am sorry, he said. And he says, are you feeding the earth there? What would you know about feeding the earth? Said Jimmy. Oh, well, it looks as if you're putting manure in. Is it for roses? It is for roses, said Jimmy. Come on in, he says, for 10 minutes. And they had an old chat. And then he said, no, we have to go. There's another group coming in. For God's sake, he says, I was enjoying the chat. Come back next week, but on time, said Jimmy. So he did come back. He came back 5 minutes early the next week, and he found that he was looking forward to it all week. Nothing in his life had changed. Nothing. Nothing, in fact, had changed. But everything had changed because he could talk to Jimmy about the old stories. They could sing the old songs. They could twinkle at one another. He got the same jokes that his grandfather got. He knew all about Manannán Mac Lair. Oh, my goodness, it was brilliant. And about the fish that would be in the River Lee and in the River Blackwater. He actually looked forward to going back. And the next week that he came, as they dug side by side, he told him of his life and how hard it was in school. And Jimmy said, well, I wonder now what we could do about that. He says, I'll ask the other fellas and I'll tell you next week. So the following week he came back and he said, I was asking the other fellas there. I says, do you remember when we were that age and we used to knock 7 bells out of one another? How did we become friends? They said, remember when Father O'Flynn said, use your head and not your claws. That was a Shakespearean quote. Was it? Said Jimmy. And he told the information to Shawnee. And Shawnee said, that might have worked then, but it wouldn't work now. Well, if you don't want my advice, said Jimmy, I'll go on. So tell me, what's the advice? The advice is that you would say something intelligent, and that while the other fellow was trying to think of an answer, you get to walk away with dignity. Like what? Said Shawnee, interested despite himself. Like, I wouldn't lower myself by rising to you. The two of them had a great laugh over that. And he thought to himself that would never work in school. But it somehow took root in the back of his brain. And he was in the canteen one day, and the woman who was doing the stew didn't even stop mid putting her spoon into the bowl when a young fella turned around right in front of her and roared across the canteen, Shawnee, I claim ya! we'll claim you for a fight. And the teachers, being smaller than a lot of the boys, they just studied their shoes and their laces and became very interested in that. The same old ding dong. And then he heard a voice, and the voice sailed across the canteen. And the voice said, "You, I wouldn't lower myself by rising to you." And then every head in the canteen, including the teachers, including the woman with the stew, stopped as if they were frozen in time, and then looked at the young fella who had shouted out that he wanted a fight. And he kind of went red and his head was kind of wobbling and he couldn't think of an answer in that moment. And then Sean, he realised it was him. He was the one that was after saying this. And they were all now looking back at him. And he almost forgot to pick up his books and to walk away with dignity. You know, the sham, cool walk of a teenage boy. But he remembered just in time. Well, he couldn't wait to see Jimmy that day. He ran down the road, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Jimmy, Jimmy," he said. "Take a breath," Jimmy said to Sean. "Do you need a glass of water?" "No, Jimmy, it worked, man, it worked. I wouldn't lower myself by rising to you. I wouldn't lower myself by rising to you." Jimmy's heart rose with his excitement. "That's brilliant," he said. "Jimmy, Jimmy, tell me another one." "What do you mean, another one?" He says, "Tell me another thing to say, another intelligent thing to say." "Well, here's the point, boy," he said. "This is what Flinny said to us. You gets the first one for free, and after that you have to use your own head." Shawnee was crestfallen until Jimmy said, "Did you ever hear of debating?" "No," he said. He said, "It's kind of like hurling for your mind." "Is it?" he said. "Yeah, you learn to fence with your words." And they practiced a bit. And the headmaster nearly fell out of his shoes when there was a knock on the door, and Shawnee Sullivan looked at him with his head kind of down, saying, "I'd like to start a debating team." They won every competition they went into. And the strange thing was that boys came out of the woodwork. They found him in the canteen or in the corridors, and they said, "How did you do that? We don't want to fight either." Sin é muiscéal. That's my story. I hope you liked it. Did you like it? Very good.
Of course.
Now we have 4 minutes to go, and I have to hand back to Baba C, Babada Babada. But before I do, John Rowe told me to let you know that in my seat next week, how dare she? But in my seat next week will be Avita from Australia. And she'll be telling you great stories for children at 6 o'clock, and there'll be no fairies interfering at all. And on Sunday, there's a story swap at 6 o'clock. Just go in the way you've gone in today and press the join button and let Mike Rust know if you'd like to tell a story or not, because it wasn't like today. I'd like to have invited everybody to tell a story. We'll have to do that someday, I think, you know. But for now, I hand back to Baba C, and I'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Maria, as magical as ever. Oh, and Evita? Evita told a story in Marrakesh this time around. We hadn't met before, and she looked at me and started telling a story, and the story tied into my family lineage, and the story matched. He said, and that's how that wise lady was the great grandmother of Baba C. And it just moved me so much. And listening to you moves me. I could listen to you all day and all night. You know. So once again, let's give a big round of applause for the one and only.
Thank you, Babada.
Thanks everybody for joining. This is great. I'm going to try to catch it on Sunday, but I have I'm supposed to be introduced to someone they want me to mentor, so I'm not sure. But anyhow, everybody, please invite other folk to join us. And when you see the hat, if you can, when you see the hat next to a storyteller's icon, please contribute. You know, because storytellers like to eat too. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, Baba. See, I just wanted to let Norman know that I'm coming to Nova Scotia. Woo! In
Oh,
June. I
No
hope
way.
you can come up. Yeah.
Ooh, maybe I can take the train up. Hey, Norman, is there a train to where you are from DC? Well, we can figure that out later. Once again, everybody take care. We'll see you here next Friday with Evita.
And Sunday.
Say again?
And Sunday.
And yeah, and we'll see you on Sunday. In the meantime, today is Fantastic Friday. And do you know the difference between a good day and a great day? It's you. So be a great day.
Mighty.
All right, everybody. We got to
Thanks
get
for
out
sticking with me through all the tech. Mwah.
Fantastic evening, Maria. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
This is always
See you-
like being with
See you
family.
soon, folks.
Only better because I don't have to feed anybody.
Oh no, I can't get out of this. What's oh, there we go. Bye.
Take care, everybody. Norman, we'll talk later.